All right, hey folks, it's Faz from Faz Lifts. Today we're going to be talking about building big delts. Big delts. So firstly, thanks for making it onto my channel. Appreciate the support. If you have any comments and questions about this video, please pop them down below. All right, let's get on. So firstly, just to give you guys a bit of a history behind why I'm speaking on this topic. So a few years ago, I competed in my first bodybuilding show. Okay. And I had pretty decent development, overall from my powerlifting days. But one thing I realized I missed was delt development. I think I needed to get bigger delts. Delts and biceps were pretty much my weak areas. So I spent essentially all of 2019 specializing on my delts. And it worked really well. Like, it was good. I completely changed my shape. So during my powerlifting career, I spent most of the time doing variations of the squat, bench, and deadlift. And so as a result, I came out with a certain degree of imbalance, which I didn't really see at the time because I was quite fat. So when I got into bodybuilding, after I got lean, did my first show, I thought, okay, I need more delts and I need more biceps. So I spent the whole year pretty much specializing in the delts, and it worked really well. And so I want to share with you what I did and my thoughts and experiences on delt training just for hypertrophy. So not for strength building, because I think that's a separate topic. And there are other exercises which might be useful. So hopefully this will give you guys a bit of an idea. And also I want to give you guys some practical tips on how to include delt training or how to modify your delt training with all the popular splits, like bro split, push-pull legs, whatever. So let's crack on. Now I'm going to use this just as a prompt to speak, but I'm trying something new. I'm just having this as a side, mostly me. So firstly, let's talk about exercise choices. Now, the majority of my delt training was a combination of lateral raises and upright rows. I didn't do a great deal of overhead pressing. So let me explain why that is. I think rep for rep, the overhead press is a lot harder to recover from, first of all. I also found that the overhead press was quite a lot of front delt, which I didn't need. So I know it's quite popular at the moment to really dog on the overhead press, and I don't mean to do that. That's not my intention, because I still think it's very useful for strength purposes, because generally the overhead press and the bench press has quite a sort of symbiotic relationship, much like the squat and the deadlift. So, but for hypertrophy and growing muscle tissue, you want to pack in as much useful volume as possible for an area. Now, if 10 to 20% of that is overhead pressing, well, that's probably going to reduce the amount of other stuff you can do. And it's probably going to reduce the amount of actual shoulder girdle related stuff you can do as well. So that would include chest pressing. So it's not a bad movement. I don't want to dog on the overhead press. I know it's quite popular to do that these days, but it's more a case of trying to fit in as much targeted work as possible. So I would rather do delt raises and add upright rows. I also found, for me, the overhead press, particularly in the bottom position here, was quite injurious for the shoulder. Somebody did explain to me why that was many years ago, but it's something to do with the way some people's shoulders are built. But the lower portion can be quite stressful. You often see bodybuilders do just the top portion. And I found, just anecdotally speaking, just the top portion, especially the lockout, was really good for the delts. So I very rarely did overhead pressing, but if I did, it was generally focused on making sure the delts were activated. So back to what I was saying. Exercise choice, the majority would be various types of lateral raises and upright rows. Now, with lateral raises, my bread and butter was and still is with dumbbells. I prefer dumbbell raises. There are machine raises and there are cable raises, but I always prefer dumbbells. I just like the strength curve. It seems to be toughest at the top where it's needed. Cables are nice all the way through. I just found I got a better pump. I got a better feeling in my delts from dumbbells. I still do. I do both, but I generally tend to favor dumbbells. I figure that's one area where machines don't win out. And also, I'll say I've never really found a machine raise which is any better than dumbbells or cables. So for my money, the pecking order seems to be dumbbells, cables, then machines when it comes to lateral raises. Now, the next thing was upright rows. Now, upright rows is a tricky one because you get to do those again with the cable, so you get the constant tension all the way through. However, much like lateral raise training, I seem to find better results with barbell upright rows. Now, whether that's with a regular barbell or an easy curl bar, it doesn't seem to matter, but I generally prefer barbell upright rows. Now, I do them with a relatively close grip. So essentially, Now, here's how you should visualize your upright row form. Your form should approximate what a side lateral looks like. So it should be no different. It is just that you're holding the weight in your hands as opposed to holding the dumbbells out. So a quick form tip there, like your upright rows from your shoulder to your elbow should look almost identical to your side laterals. All right. If you can do that, it's basically just a side lateral with a barbell in your hand. That's what you want to visualize, rather than where you should put it up or how high you should put it up to. That's all secondary proxy type of stuff. It's proxy to what you should actually be focused on, which is your delts. So focus on, the best tip I can give you is ensure that your upright rows look like dumbbell laterals just with a weight in your hand. If you can do that, you'll be golden. That's assuming your side lateral form is good. So a quick tip for side laterals as well. This is something which I see all too often, and it drives me crazy, guys in the gym. Arnold gave this tip years ago, and it was when you're doing side laterals, you want to try and lead with your elbow. Okay, first of all. So what I see quite a lot of people do is they do this motion here, where they just sort of lift it up like that. Like, it's just horrendous. Like, what is that? I mean, that part of the movement is just wasted. You want to try and lead with your elbow, and your arm, your hand, should be almost, your thumb should be pointing slightly down. So Arnold said it was like trying to pour a pitcher of water, and that's kind of what it's like. So if you're trying to pour two pitchers of water, I don't know why you'd be pouring two pitchers of water, but there you go. That's this action that you want. Your thumb should be slightly down. You should be leading with your elbows. That's how you effectively engage your side medial medial deltoids, rather than your front. So if you're doing laterals like that, it's all front delt. So that movement is what you want for your side laterals, and then you want to try and approximate that with your upright rows, just with the weight in your hands. So your upright rows will look like this. Okay. All right. So getting back to this. So right. So exercise choices, as I say, mostly lateral raises and upright rows of various kinds. Now, on that note, I'm not really going to be talking too much about rear delt training, but I think it's important. And in general, for that, I favor cables. So, but I want to focus more on just the cap of the delt here, the sides. So exercise choices, mostly lateral raises and upright rows. Now let's look at volume. I personally found the delts could handle a lot of work. And I do believe this is where we see some problems with people who do a traditional bro split, because you just don't have the capacity to do that much volume. You can do a lot on the day, but then it leaves you with a large portion of the week underperformed. So I think you really have to push the volume. I was doing up to about 20 to 25 sets when the rest of my body was on about 15. So it is very important that you really pound the hell out of the volume. I find that if you are, and this goes back to the conversation about the overhead press, I find if you're getting rid of the overhead press, or at least minimizing its use, you can do a lot more delt work because it's laterals and upright rows. And bear in mind, look, you're still going to be pressing heavy, you're still going to be pulling heavy, so you're still getting all the heavy work in, but you're just building the delts with lighter variations because you're specifically putting the stress where you want it to be. So really pound the volume. I would say on average, you probably want to be hitting the delts with maybe anywhere between 8 to 10 more sets than you would typically for the chest and back. So that's a lot, you know, so that I'll put it into perspective. So if you're normally a 10 to 12 set guy, you may well be in the region of 20 sets. If you're normally a 15 set guy, you may be in the region of 25 sets or around about that ballpark. I think with volume, you can really go to town on side delts if you are in a building phase and you're looking to build the delts up. Now, that brings us on to the next point, which is frequency. If you are doing those 25 sets a week, you really need to be breaking that up at least a little bit. So, well, I mean, we'll cover this in the next session when I talk about specific routines, but I would aim to hit the delts. I mean, I personally, during that 2019 year, I hit the delts 4 times a week, and I was doing an upper lower, and I hit the delts 4 times a week. So I was hitting the delts on the upper days and also doing a bit of touch-up work on the lower body days. Lower body days, I was doing touch-up work for the delts and for the biceps. Biceps I'll cover another time. So on the lower body days, I was doing sort of cable work just because it was a very light variation. So just to summarize this point, what I did with delt training for that year, 2019, the large majority of it was variations of lateral raises and upright rows. I favored dumbbells for laterals and barbells for upright rows, although I did everything. I really minimized the overuse of overhead presses I did favor some incline work for the chest and some high incline work, but when it came to the exercise choices, it was mostly lateral raises and upright rows. I don't remember consistently doing the overhead press that year very much at all. In terms of volume, it was ramped up very high. I think it was during the course of that year about 20 to 25 sets every single week for the whole year. And frequency, I was hitting the delts at least 4 times a week. And I made sure that I had shoulder-friendly variations so that I could do that. My shoulders didn't hurt. I just made sure my form was good and I had shoulder-friendly variations. So I had cables to really focus in on the form and make sure the stress is on the muscles rather than on the tendons. So I didn't do anything silly like really heavy overhead presses or push presses or like heavy swinging one arm laterals, which I see people do all the time. So that's a quick summary of what I did in 2019. Now, I wanted to help you guys on how to implement that type of thing in the popular routines. So if we start off with a bro split, now with a bro split, you can do a lot of delt work on the day. So that's where you'll start. You'll start off by just making sure your delt day, if you're doing a bro split, has got a lot of volume in it. So you may well be doing 20 sets for the side delts, plus an additional 10 or so for the rear delt if necessary. So that would be quite a heavy day for a lot of work. However, it's a bro split and it's a delt day, so it's not exactly tiring. So it's not like it's going to be as tiring as 18 to 20 sets on a leg day. So yeah, 20 to 30 sets on a delt day probably isn't too much. And that's how I would implement it on a bro split. And then perhaps try and split some of that volume across, maybe doing a bit of delt touch-up on a chest day or on an arm day, you know? So you've got at least a few occasions during the week where you're topping up your delts with a little bit more work. It's quite hard to overtrain those as long as you're not doing anything silly and stressing your tendons. So that's how I would do things for a bro split. For an upper lower, I would do things the way that I did. During the upper days, I was mostly utilizing dumbbells and barbells. During the lower days, I was still doing delt work, but I was mostly utilizing cables, just so I could keep the weight nice and light, provide a different kind of stress, and make sure I was putting the tension on the muscles rather than the tendons. Just making sure that I could do delt work 4 days a week without stressing out my tendons. That is vital. The delts can recover tremendously fast. Just don't stress the tendons, otherwise you're going to run into problems. With the push-pull legs, I made sure that I got delt work on both the push day and the pull day. Lower body day, I didn't do any. So potentially that was a delt work maybe as much as 4 days a week, or perhaps maybe 3 days or 2 days a week, depending on how often you do your push-pull legs. So yeah, just making sure you're doing actual side medial deltoid work on both push day and the pull day would be useful, rather than a situation where most people do medial deltoid work on the push day and then they do rear delt work on the pull day. I would probably make sure you're doing at least some medial delt work on the pull day as well. Full body is quite nice because you basically inherently do shoulders every day, so that works out quite well. So that's all good. Just making sure you're doing the right variations. So hopefully you guys found that useful. That's basically what I did, and you can see from the thumbnail to this video, I mean, it worked. I really think building bigger side delts is the key. And just again, as a special shout out to the overhead press, I don't think it's a bad movement. I don't shun away from it. It's just that when it comes to maximizing the amount of useful volume you've got in your routine, it's probably better to place that focus on the side delts. However, if you need to do the overhead press, or you feel like it's going to be useful to aid your bench press if you're a strength athlete or a hybrid, then great, crack on. It was always a great movement, and I think it's become quite popular recently to bash it. So I'm not bashing it whatsoever. I think it has its place, but I think for hypertrophy, I tend not to program it in for strictly hypertrophy. For strength, it's a different matter, I feel. But for hypertrophy, it's not something I tend to factor in because I feel the recovery is quite high. It's quite costly relative to what we get from it, considering that we don't really want to focus too much on the front delts because they tend to get enough work as it is, and most people underwork the medial delts. So that's where we want to place more focus. I would rather just place more focus on what matters. Okay, folks, hopefully that was useful. Please let me know any comments about this message, and if you have any questions, go ahead. I will be writing up a hypertrophy template and routine at some point, which will include fairly frequent delt work. So look out for that. All right, folks, if you would like to work with me on your own goals, there is a link in the description, but I will call it there for today, and I'll speak to you guys soon.